What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Down Dog Athletics Podcast, a competitor's guide to mental health and mastery. My name is Paul Klingen, and I am your host. And today, I'm going to do something a little bit different. On my Instagram, I posted a story saying for people to essentially ask me questions. And I had them ask questions around training, nutrition, and yoga, and the theme was around different, myths, I would say, around nutrition and how you lose fat and how weight loss occurs. So I'm just going to actually make this a theme, and it's going to be the 5 fat loss myths that you see. And I think one thing to remember with anything that you see on the internet or on social media, and I come back to a quote that I think was attributed to Hitler. Now, never thought I'd be talking about Hitler on this podcast, but if you say it long enough and loud enough, people will start to listen. And that's what you see with so many things like the Atkins diet, keto, paleo, or whatever extreme diet or popular diet or fit teas or saran wrap or whatever it is that you've heard of. It's corporations, people that have a lot of money invested in these myths, and if they're able to sell it to you through manipulation of creating fear around what's going on with your weight loss, or people love the fast option, and so if you can give someone an 8-day fix or a 7-day cleanse, that'll fix all their problems. In reality, it's just going to leave you worse than when you started. So I'm going to go right into it. And the first fat loss myth is that you need to do endless hours of cardio, and that cardio is going to be the best tool for fat loss. Don't get me wrong, cardio is a great tool that can be utilized to facilitate fat loss, but it certainly is not the best way. And here's why. Cardio isn't necessarily sustainable or scalable, and it doesn't build equity in your body. And I'll get into what the equity part means shortly, but let me first address the lack of sustainability first. Say you're 30 pounds overweight, and you start biking to lose weight. Initially, the 500 calories you are burning in class puts you in a calorie deficit, and you start to see some pounds come off, and that's where you lose weight. You lose fat is when you're in a calorie deficit. As you lose weight, your daily calorie requirements are going to drop. Calories are energy, and it requires less energy to move and fuel a 180-pound human than it does a 200-pound human. An analogy I really like to give for this is if you're driving a Ford F-250, thing's not going to get great gas mileage, right? And then as you start to pull some metal off the chassis and you start to make it a much lighter load and it turns into a Prius, well, now that thing gets amazing gas mileage. Well, that's kind of how your body works. So it requires less energy to maintain all the simple systems and functions of your body, to move your body through space. It's going to require more calories for a 300-pound human than a 120-pound human. So unless you drop the calories that you're consuming from a nutrition standpoint, you're going to find yourself at less and less of a deficit. Then there's the adaptation of your cardiovascular system as you get more efficient at riding the said bike or the elliptical or even running. At first, you burn 500 calories, and now you only burn 400. You should become more efficient. It's not as hard for you to run for that 45 minutes. So in order for you to continue to lose weight, not only do you have to scale how much you're running for, but you also have to drop the calories that you're consuming due to the metabolic adaptation that is occurring. And I could get into that in a whole different podcast, and I'll do that with some other guests, but essentially just think metabolic adaptation is your body adapting to the F-250 that it used to be, and now it runs on less because it's more built like a Prius. Finally, there is the likelihood of losing muscle mass, which is one that you see a lot in like long distance runners. So unless you are adequately fueling your body with enough carbs and protein, you're likely going to break down hard-earned muscle as fuel for your body so that it can continue to do the cardio. The process of catabolism is the breakdown of something like skeletal or smooth muscle, and it breaks it down into energy. So weight loss occurs in a calorie deficit, like I mentioned, and in a calorie deficit, you're giving the body less energy than it is burning. Think of, if you're building a house and you have lumber, you can't create something with resources that you don't have. So if you're losing weight, you literally don't have enough energy for your body to do what it needs, so it starts to drop pounds. Well, it drops pounds in the form of fat, but it can also drop pounds in the form of muscle. So essentially doing too much cardio and having improper nutrition can break down your muscle instead of that small pocket of fat that you might be targeting around your love handles. Like I mentioned, you look at endurance bikers and runners, you'll see just how little muscle they have. They're very small people. Sure, they are advanced level, or if they are advanced level competitors, they're going to look strong, and they're very likely going to be strength training, resistance training, in addition to eating and fueling their body appropriately. But that's also in addition to those long bouts of cardio that you're seeing with someone who is a long-distance cyclist or a long-distance runner. So I mentioned earlier the principle of building equity in your body, and what I meant by that really is resistance training and building that muscle. So resistance training builds muscle, which in turn does three things to aid fat loss. One, additional muscle is going to help regulate blood glucose by storing glucose in the muscle in the form of muscle glycogen, which is what your muscles use for energy output. It also helps regulate blood sugar, which is what spikes when you consume carbs or other forms of sugar. In the long term, this can even help prevent diseases like diabetes. The muscle is also going to help regulate blood lipids. Lipids are fats by utilizing fat to meet energy needs or by storing them in the muscle to be used later on. And then lastly, muscle increases your metabolism. So your resting metabolic rate, your RMR, is the caloric expenditure that you would have just laying on the couch. If you just laid in bed all day, your body is going to burn somewhere between, depending on the person, 1,600 to 2,400 calories. That's just a random range, but the point is that you burn calories doing nothing, which is kind of cool. Obviously, you burn more calories if you exercise, but if you have more muscle, your body requires more calories simply to function. So add on exercise, an active lifestyle, we're going for walks, and you have a recipe for having a high metabolism, burning a lot more calories just naturally, which allows you also to indulge in some of your favorite treats. So if you're trying to live off of a diet that's 1,500 calories and you want a piece of cake, all of a sudden 1/4 of that calorie expenditure is getting taken up by that simple slice of cake. So it allows you to live a little bit more, and you don't have to worry about burning it off. I got air quotes around that in a cardio class. So that's what I mean when I say the muscle builds equity in your body. I'm saying that resistance training really and building muscle allows your body to create wealth for the long term rather than just continually writing checks to cover rent. And then all of a sudden you got to write even a bigger check because the apartment you're staying in is now a little bit more expensive, and that's kind of equivalent to the metabolic adaptation that you might see. The next myth is a crazy one to me just because I've eaten so many carbs over the course of my life, but carbs make you fat. If you eat carbs, it will get stored as fat no matter what. That's what carbs do. Stay away from carbs. You see it so many times in memes. You're at the bar and you're like, oh, eating carbs. Carbs making you fat. That's simply just not true. Eating more calories than you burn creates fat accumulation. End of story. If you're in a calorie surplus, you're putting on weight. Doesn't matter if you eat only fats and protein. That's going to create fat. But if you eat only carbs, like there's Jordan Syatt's guy, definitely check him out on social media. He did a 30-day weight loss challenge only eating McDonald's, and he lost like 7 or 8 pounds. So carbs do not make you fat. However, I do want to dive into this a little bit more. And again, when I mentioned earlier in the podcast about when people say things long enough and loud enough, people start to listen, you have the Atkins diet, which encouraged people to eat around 40 grams of carbs. You have paleo, which limited a lot of processed carbs and said that even things like legumes are bad. And then more recently, keto, which is like, do not eat carbs at all. It's all fat and protein. And so you really see in the crash diet landscape, or whatever you want to call it, a demonization of carbs. And so people will lose weight on these diets and they'll attribute it to cutting out carbs, but in reality, they've just been put in a calorie deficit by cutting out all the things that are highly palatable and really easy to overeat. It's really easy to overeat pizza, Thai food, French fries, beer, Ben & Jerry's. Those things have carbs in them. If you cut them out of your diet and they were a staple of your diet, you are more than likely going to lose weight. On the flip side, though, you have fruits, vegetables. Those are going to be high in carbs, high in micronutrients, fiber that your body needs to function properly. Then there's the value of carbs when it comes to resistance training. Anyone that resistance trains or aerobic trains is burning through muscle glycogen on a daily basis and is going to need carbs to refuel those stores post-training. So if you're participating in any kind of training, you'll understand how important it is to have a banana and some peanut butter right before you work out or whatever it is that you eat. That gives you that energy. If you go into a workout not eating before, and even not eating the day before, you feel super drained. So here's 4 really crucial benefits of carbs for anyone looking to necessarily transform their body. One, it's going to give you a source of energy, like I mentioned. We need carbs to have energy to do things like breathe, digest, move, or even think. Again, we also want carbs as the primary fuel source for exercising. It's going to be the best resource or best fuel source for anything that's high energy, explosive, like lifting heavy weights or like doing something at a really fast pace on a treadmill or running sprints. This is one thing I like to really focus on too, because the more energy you have in your workouts, the more effort you'll be able to exert, and the more effort that you're able to exert is going to lead to essentially more gains in the gym or whatever it is that you're doing, which is going to help you build more muscle. If you're able to increase the intensity because you are properly fueled, you'll be able to break PRs, you'll be able to get stronger, whereas if you're constantly going to the gym drained, it's going to be much harder to see results. So again, eating more healthy foods and training hard is going to allow you to, one, eat more food, but also see more benefits from training, which is definitely a win-win. Next, carbs are going to help you recover. Carbs help replenish that muscle glycogen that gets stored in the body. So blood glucose comes from the bloodstream, gets stored into the muscles in the form of glycogen, and then can also help you repair muscles if protein is low. So carbs are also going to blunt cortisol, which is an important tool for stress reduction. So if, for example, in the morning, cortisol is going to be highest based on your circadian rhythm, and if you have a little bit of carbs in the morning, it's going to help blunt that. If someone is super high stress, that's something that I'll encourage clients to do, is increase carb intake just to kind of blunt that cortisol response. This is kind of related with that, but hormone health. A lack of carbs can risk affecting your hormones that are involved with energy balance and fat stores. A low-carb diet can lead to low leptin profiles, which is responsible for signaling the body that energy stores are good. So leptin is the hormone that is sent to the brain and is like, hey, we're good on food. We don't need anything else. On the flip side, you have ghrelin, which with the brain is going to register as like, oh man, we are starving. So if you cut carbs out, you're risking affecting the relationship of those two hormones. And then when this happens, again, your RMR, resting metabolic rate, might drop, causing you to gain weight because you've been sticking to the same diet calorie number for all these years, and now your body's requiring less and less calories just to exist. So definitely want to make sure that the hormone health is good in there, and carbs play a big role in that. And then lastly, source of fiber. So I mentioned vegetables, anything that's got stalks. So you're looking at broccoli, asparagus. You're going to want fiber in your diet, and it's going to help with digestion. So think of fiber as essentially passing or helping to pass through food through your digestive tract. It's kind of like the toothbrush per se. But those are 4 reasons, or 4 top reasons why carbs are going to be really beneficial from just a health standpoint. Number 3 for fat loss myths is one of my favorite, and it's I'm in starvation mode. So if you've ever seen Lord of the Rings, the Two Towers, there's a scene where one of the orcs goes, I'm starving. We ain't had nothing but maggoty bread for 3 stinking days. So yeah, just quoted Lord of the Rings, but that's what starvation mode reminds me of. And you are definitely not an orc in the middle of Rohan starving and needing food. So this myth is going to center around the idea that someone would eat so little food that the body snaps back and tries to protect itself by storing fat for hard times. And as I mentioned in some of the topics above, or some of the topics in this podcast, when you diet, you lower your metabolic rate. Your body adapts to running off of fewer and fewer calories. So people diet to the point of having their metabolic rate get as low as 1,400, 1,300, even 1,200 calories. That's one cheeseburger at some of the restaurants that you go to. So here's a couple things that you could actually be seeing when you think that you're in starvation mode. One, you're calculating your daily calorie expenditure wrong by overestimating how much you work out and how active you are. So this is going to set your calories higher than they really are. It's going to set your calories higher than you really are burning. And when you overconsume calories, that's when you're going to add on weight. Next is you might truly be eating 1,200 calories, most of the time. First of all, 1,200 calories is a really low number. If you're consistently eating that, definitely work with a professional or coach. Reach out, be more than happy to help work with you. But then they have that one day a week or one day every 2 weeks where they have that cheat meal or cheat day, and they enjoy a bottle of wine or something like that. And if someone's, again, resting metabolic rate, RMR, is at 1,200 calories, that's going to be 8,400 calories for the week. So say they have 1,000 calories for 6 days. Again, that's not recommended ever. And then they enjoy themselves to the tune of 3,000 calories because they were good all week. That's still going to have them putting weight on, which is crazy, I know. But because they consume 9,000 calories and their body burns 8,400, that's still a 600 calorie surplus. Over the course of a month, they're going to be putting on weight, which is, again, really sad, but at the same time, that kind of might speak to why you might be thinking, oh, I'm in starvation mode, I'm putting on weight even though I'm hardly eating. Sometimes you go into those binge mode tendencies where, you think food's really scarce, and you see this with animals where they just gorge themselves because they don't know when their next meal's coming. And if you have this mindset of I'm starving or I got to eat everything and binge everything now, even if you are really good with your diet 98% of the time, and then you have that one snap and the pendulum swings to the other side and you just go crazy on a bag of Cheetos, that's enough to, over the course of a week, put you at a calorie surplus. The last thing that could be happening is that you could be tracking wrong. So say you're tracking calories in something like MyFitnessPal, and you're like, all right, I had a few beers, I'm going to put it in. You're like, I'll just Coors Light, whatever, 110 calories. But in reality, you had 3 IPAs, which were 220 calories. So that's unfortunately, that's kind of how calories play, and they can be as particular as accountants sometimes. So you got to really make sure. It's like, all right, if I'm having a glass of wine, not all glasses of wine are equal. There is a heavy pour, there is a light pour, there is rosé, there is Cabernet, and everything in between. Number 4 for 5 fat loss myths, I have a slow metabolism. So this myth, again, is going to be touched upon throughout this podcast, but I think that where the myth comes from here is that, and I've been guilty of this as well, is you think that there is actually a metabolism organ, and it's inserted next to your liver, and it runs like a computer processor, and you either have a fast one, a slow one, or it's just a faulty part. Like, oh, if I do this one trick on Women's Health or Men's Health magazine, that'll, clear up the faulty part, and it'll work perfectly. And that's just not true. So a slow metabolism in reality is just a metabolism that likely is adapted to lower caloric needs. If your metabolism's slow or it's inflexible, if you have just been crash dieting, what people need to realize about the metabolism is that it's an ancient structure. It's been around since humans have been around, and its sole job is to keep the body and the human being in equilibrium, in balance, and have the ability to reproduce. So when you run into things like cravings, bad mood, low energy, low libido, low motivation, your body's stressed, that's the metabolism saying like, all right, we are not in equilibrium. We need to bring things back into balance. And so you can have this like snap of a binge tendency eating, and that's just a pendulum swing reaction to you maybe being in too much of a deficit for too long. Willpower is always going to be overridden by biology. But there's a few other things that are going to affect the metabolism that could cause it to be lower than you would desire. And that's going to be the amount of muscle that you had on your body. That's something I talked about earlier in the podcast. The amount of exercise that you're doing throughout the week, the amount of non-exercise activity that you're doing. So if you get in 20,000 steps and you don't exercise, that's going to help your metabolism be a lot faster because the body's moving. Yes, it's at a slow pace, but you're going to burn through more calories because just to move the body through space takes energy the same way moving a train down a train track takes coal, takes energy. And then I think sleep is one that plays a big role here as well. If you're not sleeping and you're not recovering, that's going to wreak havoc on a lot of your hormones and a lot of your body systems. And I'm definitely going to touch on this. There are definitely people that genetically have faster metabolisms, but whenever I run into this with people, you just got to realize that you can't dwell on someone else's situation in life. Someone that has a fast metabolism might have something else that is what you would deem as a hindrance, or you have gifts and advantages that they don't have. At the end of the day, we're all individual. we're all going to have different gifts. We're all going to have different things that, based off of society's perceptions, are negatives. And the only thing that you can do is focus on what you can control. And so if you recognize or believe that your metabolism is slow, try balancing out some of the factors that I just mentioned, and really rest and recover, properly mitigate stress. Start resistance training if you haven't. Start going for more or longer walks. And then again, start working with a coach. You might be in a situation where your body's adapted and you have a really low resting metabolic rate, and your body only requires 1,100, 1,200 calories, and that's the situation where you might need to reverse diet, and that's where working with a coach, working with a nutrition professional can be really helpful in getting your metabolism up to a higher level to where you're able to eat 500 more calories a day and not be gaining weight. All right, number 5, the final fat loss myth for this podcast is I want to target X area. Could be triceps, could be belly fat, could be butt. Unfortunately, fat accumulates where fat accumulates. It's like snow. Wherever it lands, it lands. Nothing you can do about it. Some people accumulate fat in the butt, and it's glory to the heavens. They store all the fat in a certain area, and it happens to accentuate their figure, and it's fantastic. Then you got some people who maybe they store fat in the face, and they look like they got stung by a hornet's nest, yet they still have a six-pack. And it's crazy because the body's just going to store fat in different spots. You can't really control it. Maybe you could go the route of liposuction, which I would never recommend, because unless you have completely different habits, wherever you suck the fat off, it's going to go right back to it. And so when you eat in a calorie surplus, that extra energy is going to be stored in adipose tissues all around your body. And these can be at the surface, like right below the skin, or actually around your organs. So when you are losing fat, you might be losing it in your legs, you might be losing it on your organs, and you might not see any of the results specifically where you want to see them, again, on your abdomen or around your arms, but it can still be happening. You just got to be a little bit more patient. Fat loss is going to happen throughout the body. One thing a little caveat that I'll give with clients is that one way to increase maybe the tonality of muscles, how visible a muscle might be, is to hypertrophy train that specific muscle group. So hypertrophy training is what builds the muscle. It's training specifically for muscle growth. And so if you want to tone your triceps and you want to lose fat in that area, you're not going to be able to lose fat in that area. But what you can do is really train the triceps to help create a bigger muscle. So an analogy that I like to really give here is think of toning and making muscle more visible is really like a beach where there are rocks and there's the tide that comes in and out. So if the tide is low, that's a low body fat. And even the littlest rocks will show. I like to think of Justin Bieber when he was super skinny, just getting tattoos. Man, his tide was low. He had tiny muscles, but everyone thought that he was ripped and had a six-pack. But in reality, he wasn't really lifting at all. But then if the tide is in, so that's going to be high body fat, only the biggest rocks are going to show. So that's where you see someone that is 300 pounds, NFL lineman, but obviously very strong. You can see the muscles popping out. And if all they did was lose weight, they would look incredibly jacked. So I just want you to think about getting those rocks bigger with strength training and then having periods of fat loss phases where you can lower the tide. And for some people, those things will happen simultaneously. If you're 250 pounds, 50 pounds overweight, and you are strength training, you're going to be building muscle while also seeing a body composition and fat loss going down. There is also a significant correlation between stress and storing fat. When we are stressed, the body releases cortisol into the bloodstream, and that's actually going to directly store fat around the stomach and around the abdomen. So that's maybe another caveat that I would give here, in that you have human visceral fat cells that are located around the organs that have 4 times the blood supply compared to subcutaneous fat cells that are going to be right below the skin. So because your organs are located in your stomach, increased stress, increased cortisol is going to actually lead to greater deposits of fat around the organs in the stomach and increase the visibility of belly fat. So that's where you see people with huge bellies. If you feel like you're storing fat in your stomach, managing your stress is going to be something that could potentially help target weight loss in that area. That's very anecdotal, but we do know that that's where fat is stored, especially if it's fat caused from high stress levels. In conclusion, that's all I got for this podcast. At the end of the day, fat loss is going to come from being in a calorie deficit. You can do Atkins, you can do paleo, you can do the carnivore diet, you can do the squirrels diet that just feeds you acorns, you can do the McDonald's diet. Really, your diet is whatever you eat, and you want to choose something that's going to be the most sustainable, and you do want to choose healthy, high-quality foods. That's the other thing I probably should add. If you are only eating garbage, your body is definitely going to let you know that, and you'll start to run into problems. So eat whole foods, eat real foods. If it comes from the earth, that's definitely a good thing. And then the last thing I'll just add is sustained fat loss comes from balancing your metabolism. Give yourself diet breaks so that you're not constantly, crash dieting and affecting your metabolism to the point where your metabolic rate is so low that when you go back to eating your normal diet that you were eating a year ago, you avoid that situation where you put all the weight back on and then some. But other than that, thank you so much for listening to the Down Dog Athletics podcast. If you have any questions, feel free to shoot me an email, paul@downdogathletics.com, or message me on social media. Would love to hear from you. And if you got something out of this podcast, I'd love if you share it. I'd love if you message me and let me know. Other than that, I'll catch you next time on the Down Dog Athletics podcast.